Monday evening, everybody. Welcome back to another video. And boy, do I have one tonight. This is finally gonna be some of the movies I watched in June and July. So, June was an okay month for movies, but I didn't watch I didn't watch nearly as much as I did in July. Guys, I'm going to be talking about 31 movies. Going to be a long one, so buckle in. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started with the first movie I watched in June. So I started the month off with Bad Boys for Life. And this was the first movie to release that first weekend in June. So this brings back Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. And it's just more shenanigans with them, but they find out that their old lieutenant might have been part of a cartel drug busting ring. So in Bad Boys Ride or Die, their lieutenant or sergeant or whatever, he actually got killed in the line of duty. So somebody set him up, and whoever helps him out, which are Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, the FBI or whatever are after them, and they're both on the run trying to clear their name. I really did enjoy this one. I do have a full review on it, so you can check that out somewhere on the channel. So I really did enjoy that one. That was the first one I watched. Moving on to The Watchers. And I didn't even see this until the third week in June. So like I said, June's going to be pretty short. But this is the directorial debut of M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, Ishana Shyamalan. And this adapts the novel by the same name by A.M. Shine. This is basically like a folk horror fairy tale in a way, I guess. And it's about these four people who just have this bunker, and they stare at a window looking for the Watchers each night. Well, it turns out the Watchers are kind of like shape-shifting doppelgangers to these people. This movie was not really memorable and not really good at all. But they ultimately ended up being like fairies or something. It was weird. So moving on, I have Inside Out. Yes, I finally watched that. And this movie released in 2015, and this tells a story of Riley as I don't know if she's 10 or 12 or something, but it just has all her emotions in her head. There is joy, anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. Hey, I remembered it. But these five emotions just help her get through life. but sadness takes over Riley, and she kind of gets like depressed, and she has like nothing to do with like her family, and she ultimately tries to run away, but it's up to Sadness and Joy to like stop Riley from doing horrible things. This was a pretty deep movie, and it's pretty relatable to kids and adults alike. But I really did enjoy this one. The next one was Inside Out 2, which as of recording this is now the 10th highest grossing film of all time. $1.52 billion. And this is probably the highest grossing film of the year thus far. But this is the way to do a sequel right. Because Riley is now a teenager, and there's new emotions coming up that help her with like puberty. There's like anxiety, ennui, and embarrassment. And ennui is kind of like boredom, and it kind of like makes her sarcastic towards her friends. So this one definitely relates more to teenagers, because anxiety is a really, really strong emotion to go through. So near the end of the film, anxiety just takes over her mind, and she's just spiraling out of control. It's actually kind of hard to watch, but I really did enjoy both of these films overall. So that was Inside Out 2. Next, The Mutilator, or whatever this thing was called. So this was like another 80s slasher that I watched on Tubi, and it's about like a deformed man that has like an axe as his main weapon, and he's just after these kids at a summer cottage, and blood and guts and whatever happened. This movie was terrible. But I have a movie down here later in the list that might be worse or better, but we'll see. Nothing else much to say there. Moving on, I have The Bike Riders. And this one really disappointed me, because this one was kind of like an anticipation for me. So this tells the true story of a motorcycle gang throughout the 60s in Chicago, I believe, and stars Tom Hardy, Jodie Comer, Austin Butler, and Norman Reedus, and quite a few other people. But basically it's about like this photojournalist that just follows this motorcycle gang throughout their popularity. This movie wants to be a crime drama, but it's ultimately a hangout movie, if you know what I mean. So there are events that happen but lead to nowhere, and then they're sitting in the bar. Events lead to nowhere, sitting in the bar. And basically the whole story is told by Tom Hardy's wife. Wait, no. Austin Butler's wife. This movie was okay, but I doubt I'd ever watch it again. That was the bike riders. Okay, now we're getting into something pretty decent. A Quiet Place. First time I ever watched this movie. And this has been out for quite a while now. I have no idea why I slept on it, but this is an alien invasion movie that centers around the Abbott family, and they just like need to stay quiet in this post-apocalyptic world, or the Death Angels will get them. That's what they're called. So this is basically 90 minutes of fighting to survive. There are some pretty heartbreaking deaths in here, and I found this movie to be decent, but it kind of was a slog to get through, because like 85% of this movie is just pure silence. So I guess it just kind of got on my nerves a little bit, but it was still a pretty tense movie. But I really did enjoy this one as a whole. Is it my favorite in the franchise? Probably not. But take it for what it's worth. That is A Quiet Place. So naturally, I moved on to A Quiet Place Part 2. And this kind of starts off with the premise of day one, which I'll get into in a minute, where it has the perspective of the Abbott family right as the alien invasion happens. So it's all like chaos throughout this beginning of the movie. And then you have like a time jump that picks up right after Lee Abbott's death in the original, and now it's Emily Blunt and her kids fighting to survive. So Emily Blunt and her kids just go throughout this apocalyptic wasteland looking for other survivors. It's basically this entire movie. I found this one to be a little bit more action-packed, because when they finally do get to the island, they think they're safe and they can make all the noise in the world, but the Death Angels ultimately do get on the island and just destroy it. So it's up to Emily Blunt to fight for survival. Really decent movie though, and I really liked how all these ended. So that was A Quiet Place Part 2. And finally, to wrap up June, A Quiet Place Day 1. This one was probably my most anticipated movie of June, and I really did enjoy it quite a bit. This expands on Part 2 because this is a prequel that happens before the alien invasion. And this stars Lupita Nyong'o as our main character. And she's basically going through New York fighting to survive. And she's very sick as well. But there is one thing that she wants in life before she ultimately bites the dust. And that is a piece of pizza. I know it may sound a little off putting, but the journey to get to that pizza was pretty substantial. So she meets this guy and they form a friendship, and there's also a cat that is part of this trio that I have no idea how the cat survived. But this one was probably my favorite of the three. I know that's recency biased, but I've only seen the first two once. And I would probably rewatch day one a little bit more. But this whole franchise was just decent. I really did enjoy my time with it. Those are the 9 movies I watched in June. Moving on to July. We're going to be here a while. So I watched 22 movies in July. So this has a lot of variety to it. I have horror, a childhood classic. I'll get into that. Some Deadpool and Logan content near the end. Stay tuned for that. And just some comedies from the 2000s. Yeah, I was all over the place in July. But without wasting any time, let's go ahead and show you the first movie I watched for July. That was a rewatch of X. Finally, I rewatched this. This was the kickstart to the X trilogy, which is a slasher trilogy that deals with 3 different periods of time. This is primarily in the 70s, and this is about a film crew who go to this farm and they film a porno. They call it Farmer's Daughters, and they're being hunted by this crazy old couple named Howard and Pearl. And I do have to admit, the first hour of this movie is kind of slow. But once it gets into like the whole slasher aspect, I'm down. I really do enjoy this movie quite a bit. So that was X. And not to mention, you got some very brutal deaths in here. So there's that. Followed by Pearl. And this is the prequel to X that features the upbringing of Pearl in 1918, I want to say. So this is basically a backdrop of World War I and the Spanish flu epidemic. So there are parallels to COVID-19 because of the masks being worn. But this is basically a character study of Pearl. She's living under her tyrannical religious mother and her ailing father, and she just wants to get out of that life and become a movie star. Well, she finds a projectionist, and they start heading it off a little bit, but she snaps after a failed audition. And holy crap, does she snap. So I've heard people compare this to Wizard of Oz meets Psycho on a farm. And that is pretty accurate because of the nostalgic filmmaking here. It really does feel like a film from like the 30s with a modern lens. And the way this thing ends is just unnerving. There's like a 5-minute monologue near the end that Pearl talks to her sister-in-law, I believe, and she just like spills her guts on how she really feels. But her sister-in-law is terrified of her, and she tries to get away, but Pearl just follows her with an axe. It's some pretty brutal stuff. And there's some graphic violence that just like comes out of nowhere. But that ending just still gives me chills. Her husband comes home from the war, and her husband is greeted by her atrocities. And she just like stands there smiling at him. But it's a very, very good movie. That was Pearl, and to end the X trilogy, I finally saw Maxine. This was by far my most anticipated horror movie of the year. And this one was not as good as the other two, but I really did enjoy this one overall. This takes Maxine Minks to like 1985 in Los Angeles, and she's on the verge of becoming a new horror starlet. And the movie that she is wanting to star in is called The Puritan. So there are some mysterious murders that start happening in Los Angeles, and turns out it's the Night Stalker. But there is also a copycat killer on the loose. This movie has Giallo influences, which I didn't mention that in my review series. But Giallo is like Italian horror cinema that is just like a murder mystery. And that's basically what this whole movie is. It's just a murder mystery. I found this movie to be just okay, but the ultimate reveal was way too easy to figure out. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but the X trilogy might be one of the best horror trilogies ever. All three of these movies are very different from each other, and they're all entertaining. So that was Maxine. Moving on, I have the other 80s slasher that I wanted to talk about, The Prey. And this was about like three groups of hikers who get plagued by a madman in the woods. I hardly even remember this movie, but moving on. The next one, y'all are gonna laugh at me, but I don't care. Love to Hate Nickelback. Yeah, I watched that. But this is just like a documentary of Nickelback and their meme worthy success. But there are Royal fans out there that do love Nickelback, and there are fans out there that hate Nickelback. I do like Nickelback, but I wouldn't say that I love them. But I listened to Nickelback all the way since like high school, maybe even middle school. So they've been around for a while. But this was just about like their success story. Moving on, I have Long Legs, which was probably the most overhyped horror movie of the summer. This movie was weird, man. So this is a Nicolas Cage starring serial killer thriller movie. That was a mouthful. And already people are comparing this to Silence of the Lambs and Seven. So Nicolas Cage is just like this weirdo who makes dolls, and he has like an accomplice that helps deliver these dolls to unsuspecting families, and these dolls make the men evil, and ultimately the men kill their family. And then Longlegs just has like a thing for women born on the 14th of every month. Yeah, my head hurts just like talking about this movie. But I found this movie to be extremely weird and kind of boring. But it is very unsettling, and Nicolas Cage was extremely disturbing. So, take it or leave it. I thought Longlegs just wasn't for me. I mean, it was fine for what it was, but is it the scariest movie of the year? Not even close. But I just thought that this movie was fine at best. So that was Longlegs. Moving on, a complete 180 for the next 3 movies. It's Anchor Man, not Anchor Lady. I've been waiting to say that ever since I wanted to film this video. Yeah, Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. Don't ask me why, I just felt like I was in the mood. But 20 years old this movie is. Holy crap. But this stars Will Ferrell, Christina Applegate, Steve Carell, Dave Koechner, Fred Ward, Paul Rudd, and so many cameos. But this is just the classic story of Ron Burgundy being on top of the world in the news, and a woman comes in and takes over the news, and they start falling in love, but it's just like a kind of like a sibling rivalry type of deal. But they ultimately do get together. So really no story here. It's just like gag after gag. I can like literally quote this movie to no end. And don't even get me started with like the news fight. Man, you have like cameos like Vince Vaughn, Tim Robbins, Ben Stiller, and Luke Wilson. And they just fight to the death. But this is a classic comedy. I mean, I know the humor is a little over the top, but I always loved this movie. What else can I say? That's Anchorman. You stay classy, Florissant. So moving on from there, Anchorman 2, The Legend Continues. This pretty much expands on everything that Anchorman was. It's bigger, more bolder. I mean, I ain't gonna say better, because this movie was kind of like a letdown to me. But same humor, but Ron Burgundy is offered this job where he reports the news 24 hours a day. And the company is called GNN. How original there. But the jokes don't land as hard in this movie. But Ron is kind of like separated from Veronica, and they have like a kid together. And this kid like really got on my nerves. He was kind of an annoying prick, in my opinion. But by far the best part of this was the news fight. Better cameos. You have Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Will Smith, Jim Carrey, Vince Vaughn is back. I think even Luke Wilson might be back. And even John C. Reilly, of all people, and Liam Neeson. I'm like, what is this? But by far, that was the best use of cameos that I've ever seen. And that whole news fight saved this movie. But I just found this to be okay. I only saw this maybe like less than 5 times. Oh yeah, not to mention, he also starts falling for, I want to say her name is, I'll have to look that up, but I want to say it might be, basically she's like Ron's new boss, and she is black. And the scene at the dinner table is just very hard to watch, but it is hilarious to say the least, because Ron just like acts all ghetto and stuff. Man, this movie might be more offensive than the first one, but this next movie is more offensive than these two. But that was Anchorman 2, The Legend Continues. Next, Tropic Thunder. This might be the most offensive comedy that I've ever seen. And this head movie makes my eyes rain. You make me happy. Simple Jack is in here, and it is the funniest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Oh my god, I just needed to get that out. Oh, I need a minute now. But this stars Ben Stiller, Jack Black, Robert Downey Jr., and he's playing a dude disguised as another dude. And he's all throughout the MCU now, apparently. But this is basically a satire about the Vietnam War, and it's about like this film crew that tries to recreate this veteran's story. Things go to crap immediately. So they're just dropped in the jungle, and their director just blows up right in front of them. So they have like no movie to shoot. So they just make all this up as they go along. Then Ben Stiller gets kidnapped by like rebels, and the only movie they know by Tug Speedman is Simple Jack. But anyway, Ben Stiller gets kind of like brainwashed, and he just joins them. So it's up to his crew to get him out. But this is a classic comedy. I mean, all the fake trailers at the beginning are something to behold. You have like the Scorcher series, the Fatties, and Satan's Alley. But very memorable characters and just a laugh-a-minute movie. So that was Tropic Thunder. And I don't apologize for my horrible imitations there. I just had to do it. So, moving on. Okay, I'm back. I got a drink. So, moving on. We are at movie 10 for July. I'm nowhere near done with this video. The next movie I watched was Three Ninjas, High Noon at Mega Mountain. Don't ask me why, but this was a very weird block for that month of July. So, this was like a classic 90s kids comedy that I watched growing up. And it's just about like these three kids who are trained ninjas, and they go to like this amusement park for like the youngest brother's birthday party, and the amusement park is taken over by like cyber terrorists. And there's also Hulk Hogan in this movie as Dave Dragon, which has got to be the cheesiest 90s character that I've ever seen. And it's just a very kid-friendly movie that I really do have fun with. And there is this one scene that I've been holding back ever since I rewatched this. So, three of the goons are like in line for a ride, and like this Aaron Carter Mohawk looking dog just intimidates them by calling them a butthead, and one of the dudes just like yells at him, and this dude just pisses his pants. And it's probably the funniest part in this movie. But this is a very silly movie. It's very over the top and very 90s. But not to mention you have like Lonnie Anderson as Medusa, which is just like this buxom blonde that just like wears this stripperella outfit thing. And her second in command is played by Jim Varney. Yeah, Ernest is in this movie. But pretty silly movie, but I really do enjoy it quite a bit. So, moving on, I actually have another decent thriller that I watched on Shudder, Night of the Hunted. And this is just basically like an isolation thriller that takes place in like a gas station. So this couple is stopping to get gas, and the woman just goes into the gas station, but she's being hunted by a sniper. Pretty tense movie though, but I really did enjoy it quite a bit. That was Night of the Hunted. Moving on, I continued the Rambo series with Rambo First Blood Part 2. So, I read Rambo 2 and 3 in July, so I obviously watched the movies. And Rambo First Blood Part 2 takes place in Vietnam, and Rambo is just there to get prisoners of war out of there, and they just escape to Thailand. One-man army awesomeness. So that was Rambo First Blood Part 2. I moved right along to Rambo 3. And Rambo is going to Afghanistan to get Colonel Troutman out of prison. Well, captivity, I should say. And this is where this franchise got a little bit too macho for me, which is very weird because I really do enjoy this series a lot. And it is the most macho thing that you're ever going to watch. But Rambo 3 just had like that 80s machismo times 10. But I really did enjoy Rambo 3 as well. It is my least favorite, but it's still a damn good movie. And there are aspects of like the USSR invading Afghanistan as well. So that's one thing that Rambo does well. History. But that was Rambo 3. Moving on, I have a rewatch of Twister. I watched this about like a couple months ago, but this is gearing towards a movie that I'll talk about here in a few minutes. But I rewatched this This came out in '96, so nearly 30 years old. But this stars Bill Paxton, Helen Hunt, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Carrie Elwes as like a rival storm chaser. So, all about tornadoes and the damage that they make. Really good 90s disaster film. I have my full thoughts on my Twister and Twisters dual review, so check it out. But classic disaster film, Twister. Followed by Fly Me to the Moon. And this one was a wild card. But this stars Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson. And this is basically about Scarlett Johansson trying to make profit out of the moon landing. So she works in advertising, and all she wants is to endorse the astronauts on the moon landing. So turns into like a summer romance, if you will. But I really did enjoy the chemistry here, and it was a pretty solid movie. That was Fly Me to the Moon. And the moment y'all been waiting for, Twisters. Yes, I did watch this. This was not really a legacy sequel. It was kind of like a soft reboot trying to make you think that it's a legacy sequel. But this stars Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones. And they're trying to study tornadoes and get a 3D model of a tornado forming. But Glenn Powell is Tyler Owens, and he's like this crazy YouTube guy that just calls them the Tornado Wranglers. And this movie is very, very country. The whole album is country. But still a very entertaining movie. I don't think it's as good as the first one, but people say that the first one is not as good as this one, but I really did enjoy the original more. So, Twisters is still a really fun movie. But moving on, I have 6 more movies to talk about, and this is already coming on close to an hour. Next, I rewatched Rambo 2008, and this one is by far the most brutal of the franchise. But this one is my second favorite of the franchise. So Rambo is now in Burma, I believe it is, and he tries to protect this church group from all these rebels that are just terrible people. And Rambo just goes on a one-man army mission and just annihilates these people. Man, this movie is good. And it is so awesome as well. So, Of course, it has the same premise where Rambo is our main hero and he just like mows down all these people. But this is probably the one that I rewatch the most. And it is just relentlessly brutal. So that was Rambo 2008. And I ended with Rambo Last Blood. And this one came out in 2019. This was the second time I ever saw this movie. And I actually really did enjoy it the second time more. But Rambo is essentially retired and he lives on his farm. But he had like a sister that nobody knew about. So his niece comes into like the picture and she decides to go to Mexico to find her father. And that ended up being like a terrible idea because her father had nothing to do with her. So Rambo goes in to get her out, but this thing just ends in tragedy. His niece actually passes away from her injuries. And this doesn't really get into like Rambo until about like an hour in. So this is arguably the slowest of the Rambo movies. But it's pretty much Home Alone meets Rambo and the last half of this movie. And that's what you're there for. And I really do enjoy that part of the movie. But this is a pretty solid movie. And as we know, the last one, because of Last Blood. But there you have it. And next, I'm just going to breeze through these last four. Deadpool. All about like the merc with a mouth, and he teams up with Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and this is all his origin story, and he's just on the path of revenge to destroy Ajax / Francis. But most of this movie is a flashback, and it's about like 15% current storyline. Deadpool. Deadpool 2 brings in Cable and X-Force. And they are on a mission to stop Russell, which is a very dangerous mutant, from destroying Cable's life. So, more funny and extremely gory. But you also have the introduction of Juggernaut in here as well, which is awesome. But you also have the death of X-Force very brutally. And the end credits are super hilarious, where Deadpool just rewrites history. Deadpool 2. Logan. This is the culmination of Logan as we know it throughout the X-Men universe. And he's on the mission to save this girl from like a task force that works with like Weapon X. So his daughter is X-23, and they're just on the run from Pierce. And this ends in tragedy where Logan ultimately passes away. But this is the most depressing X-Men film ever made. And it might be one of the most depressing superhero movies as well. But it is so, so good. That was Logan. And finally, Deadpool and Wolverine. What can I say? My favorite movie of the year thus far. This movie delivered on cameos, bloody violence, and just banter between Deadpool and Wolverine. I love this movie, and you can get my full thoughts on these 4 films on my channel. So that's already on the channel, so if you want my full thoughts, you can check that one out. But I made this video in under an hour, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll be back for solo movie reviews tomorrow. I have Trap, Alien, and Aliens to talk about. So I'm going to do those tomorrow. But other than that, that's all I got for this video. Adios. Peace. It's time for some shut-eye.